Thanks,
Thank
Tina.
you.
Bye.
Joy.
All right, Andy?
So we are,
Mine is frozen.
are we recording? Yes, we are. Okay.
Mhm.
So with that, I am going to call the Finance Committee meeting of June 9, 2023 to order. And it is 1 p.m., the time noticed for the meeting. This meeting is being held by Zoom. Members of the public, you have access to the meeting via Zoom and by Amherst Media. But everybody should be advised that this meeting is being recorded, both video and audio. And an explanation for those in the public who may not be aware, the staff is unavailable today. So Sean and Athena, who are usually supporting the committee, are not here, but we're going to go ahead with the meeting to do as much as we can today and follow the agenda for the significant items, I think, except for one, which is the review of the third quarter FY23 revenue and expense report. That is going to be postponed to another meeting because we do need staff from the finance department, both our comptroller and our finance director present.
Andy, I just want to mention that, however, if people have questions they'd like answered in advance of our next meeting, please go ahead and forward them to Andy and Sean.
And we will make sure that those are available to the public, possibly by reporting them again at the next meeting or including any responses in the packet. So with that said, I need to go through the list of people here just to confirm that everybody can hear and be heard. And so I'll, as I usually do, alphabetical by last name. So Anna.
Hello, everybody. I can hear you.
And Lynn.
I'm present.
Bob.
Here.
Matt.
Present.
Bernie.
Present.
Kathy.
Here.
And yes, I'm present. And Alicia had indicated to me that she is expecting to be able to join us by 1:30, that she cannot join earlier, but we're going to go ahead and try and move this meeting along because I know that a number of people have other things going. And so what I'm going to do is look at the participant list and see if there's anybody. At this point only, I think there's one person present in the audience. If anybody who's on watching at any time would like to add, but if you're interested in public comment, please raise your hand so that we can bring you into the room. Seeing that there's not a request, that the hand has not gone up, I'm going to assume that there's no request for public comment for today. And therefore, what we want to do, I'm going to postpone the counselor compensation proposal until Alicia is here, since she's one of the two co-sponsors. Michelle cannot be here. Michelle sent some comments which have been added to the packet for the meeting. So because are a matter of public interest, and so it's comments to a committee, and therefore they are in the packet. Anybody who wants to see her comments can find that were offered to the committee just this morning, can find them. So anyway, counselor compensation we're going to come back to, and therefore I want to turn to the review and recommendation of Council Order 2407B, which is a request of the Community Preservation Act Committee, and the memorandum explaining the order and the order are in the packet, also available for everybody. And we're also in the packet for the council meeting on Monday. Just briefly, just as a reminder, what this is about, that the Community Preservation Act Committee had been holding funds aside to address a request that they were very interested in, but there was insufficient information for them to make a recommendation. At the time they made their recommendations, and there's still insufficient information available. And if the money that is being held aside is not transferred to a specific reserve account before the end of the year, it will not become available until the next round of the process, so that their request is to do as requested in the order, and that is to make a transfer of the funds into a special reserve for FY24, which is of course the year that's coming up. Otherwise, so that they wouldn't have to be held for expenditure until FY25. Funds are, if they don't make a recommendation, then they would ultimately fold back into the funds that are available for FY25 distribution, but the order gives them the extra flexibility, and that is the request of the CPA committee. Are there any questions about this request or any thoughts about it?
Andy, I can't raise my hand because I'm showing my screen.
Okay, go ahead. Lynn.
I just want to mention the reason I think we should support this is because periodically we have had off-cycle requests for CPA money. And this would allow that money to be available for that. Two examples of the off-cycle requests. One was for Kendrick Park for a matching grant, and the other one was when we quickly bought the land on Belchertown Road for affordable housing. Anna has her hand up.
Yeah, Anna?
Lynn, I have a question about those two. This is a reserve for a specific project. It's not just a empty reserve for off-cycle requests. The other two, the Belchertown Road and Kendrick Park, were those done in a similar fashion, with the request to finance for a reserve intended for a specific project for the specific amount? I don't remember. I was on CPA at that time, and so I don't remember. For the Belchertown Road, not for Kendrick. Oh, no.
So what happened was they actually came forward when the new CPA money was available,
That's great.
but they
This
did
is
come
different.
to finance for review.
Absolutely, but it's a little bit of a different type of reserve.
Yeah, right.
Because
I
it's
think
for a
that the other thing about those two examples that you gave is that both of them were significant expenditures that involved indebtedness.
right.
And since we were taking out loans, it was not actually expenditures in the year that we were making the decision, but it was expenditures in future years. I don't think that the order specifically mentions the one item that they had been discussing from the last round. So if it moved into an FY 24 budgeted reserve for Community Preservation Act purposes, I think that it could be used for any FY24 expenditure if they was to recommend. And I do have to point out that they may make a recommendation, but it still has to go back to this committee and to the council for ultimate approval so that there's nothing that's, we as a committee and the council after us are not giving up our role to review any recommendation made. Kathy?
Yeah, I was going to underscore what you just said, Andy. Anna, you had said it's for a specific purpose, but it's not, even though they discussed a potential purpose. And one of the other things about, I have been the liaison, although I'm not going to be in the future, is in the past, they had to, because they had potentially underspent in a particular category, they had to reserve it for historic or for something else. This time, they met all the 10% of this, 10% of that, so it could be a general reserve. And this, I know this has been done in the past. It's basically I think it's a good policy because you don't want to have the CPA, this year wasn't an example of that, in a year where there aren't terrific proposals. You don't want them spending the money just to spend it out. So being able to have a reserve for the following year. And there was one year a few years ago that reserve became really important to then finance some larger projects. So I think this is a good policy. This was not one of the years where they were under proposed. They had more than enough to spend all their money. And they had to trim multiple projects. So I just want to, and Anna, it's written to be general, and I think it's deliberate because they weren't even sure the one thing that they were interested in is going to be able to come back anywhere near this kind of a price tag. So.
Yeah,
Yep.
Thank you, Kathy. I the memo and the order are obviously different framings of this request.
So anything else on it? Otherwise,
I'll hold my question till after Bob.
okay, Bob.
Yeah, I support this. Actually, Kathy answered my question. The issue is whether we can do this or not. And it seems like we can. So I think it's a good idea to do it.
So Anna, did you have something?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have more general, I support this. I think that it's great. And CPA is one of my favorite things. And so I definitely am excited about providing more opportunity through it. I think I just have like logistical questions about how this functions, but I think those are more appropriate for me to talk to Kathy as the liaison offline and get a better understanding about at some point.
Yeah, well, and
That's okay, Kathy, I can call you at some point.
No, but when I watched what the committee did way back when, is the reserves get held. And so when they start their deliberation, and they usually start a little bit in September to say, how much money do we have? Sonia would put up, and we have this reserve held over, so that it's got a FY. It's each year is how much you've collected, and they never know exactly what the state appropriation would be. They always can assume it. And so far, the state has not done what it did multiple years ago, which is cut. So it's like about how much money do we have to work with when they start to open up for it. But yeah, it gets carried on the books as what it says here as a reserve.
Matt?
I just will say, and in no surprise, but I think it would have been nice to have Sean here to explain this, because when I look at the memo, it seems to me it's kind of essentially an accounting function. They weren't allowed to make the award, or not. I'm sorry, they did not want to make the award. They had a conditional award that they didn't want to make this year, and had they not created this special reserve account to hold those funds would have been frozen for an entire year. I think. As I read it, it was just kind of an accounting move that seemed sound, but who am I? I don't know. So I think as I read it, it's pretty straightforward. If Kathy feels the same, I'm very comfortable with it.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, so this is what I'm summarizing here. And that is, while they want to hold these reserves into this coming year with the possibility that the church might come back with an acceptable proposal, the reality is, if they don't, this way the money is generally available as well. It is an accounting move.
Yep. That's accurate.
Matt?
Matt, are you frozen? Oh, okay. Your hand is
Hand
still
is
up.
still up, son.
Okay.
Okay.
So, Andy, do you want me to make a motion or do you want to do it?
Well, I think that the motion would be that the Finance Committee recommend to the council adoption of Council Order 2407B, in order appropriating the FY 24 Community Preservation Act budget as required under MGL Chapter 44B.
Second.
So there's been a motion that's made and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing no request for further discussion, I'll start with Lynn.
Aye.
Bob,
Support.
Matt,
Support.
Bernie,
Support.
Kathy.
Yes.
I'm a yes. Alicia has not joined us yet, so she's at this point absent. Anna.
Aye.
So of council members, it is 4-0 with one absent in the support of 3 resident members. And I think that we can go on to at least one other item that isn't going to take very much time, unless, and then I'm going to see if there's anything that was not anticipated that you want to, any members want to raise. But you have 3 sets of minutes that were submitted to us, and I have reviewed them and made some very minor suggestions in an amended version that is in the packet, so it's available to the public. And those are March 7, 2023, February 21, 2023, and March 21, 2023. Are there other suggestions for those minutes? Then I would make a motion to adopt them as amended. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. So that said, if there's no.
Andy, I have just one question. That is not all the minutes we have in the packet. So you've just picked out a few.
Well, I was going to ask that in a minute, but
Okay, I'm fine with voting on this set, but I was just wondering whether that means the others are being carried over, or what did that mean? That it's a question.
I would, unless somebody wants to make a motion, has reviewed them and feels comfortable enough with them to make a motion. I have not done my review, but if somebody else has reviewed them and is comfortable making a motion, I certainly will recognize it. But why don't we deal with the motion on the floor first?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So Bob.
Support.
Matt.
Support.
Bernie.
Support.
Kathy.
Yes.
I'm a yes. Alicia is still absent. And Anna.
Aye.
And Lynn.
Aye.
So again, it's 4-0 with one member absent of voting of the councilor members in support of the 3 resident members. At this point, I believe that we're still, as an attendee or panelist, do not yet have Alicia, and it's not quite 1:30, so it's the amount of time that she has said. I will go ahead and start the discussion in a moment if there's no other issues, but are there any other issues that people would like to bring up that is unanticipated business, Kathy?
I don't think it's unanticipated. I would just like to know if we have another meeting in June and if we have any meetings in July. So and what day and what time they might be. And and so I'll make one. If you're going to have another meeting in June with a postpone, I'm probably going to miss it, but I'm not sure that Friday works well for people. So if there's a meeting in July, so it's very useful for my calendar to hold a date, even if we cancel it.
Yeah, that of course is one of the agenda items, regular meeting schedule for the remainder of 2023. Kind of fits into that classification on the agenda. So it's actually a noticed item. I was anticipating that we would have a very brief discussion when we had Alicia present, because we know that she's the one who has a complicated schedule that tried to work around, and we understand that there's been some changes in her availability, but we don't have any specific information without her presence.
Okay.
So I do want to come back to that. And I think the only other item that I would have that I'm going to call unanticipated, because it really came out of a Gazette article that was, I think, less than 48 hours ago, about the Community Preservation Act. And it was just noting that there is advocates are very concerned that not enough CPA money is being allocated. And we're in what I would call the Gold Star community group of municipalities that have met that threshold on a continuous basis, and so that it was not the issue. When it was reported on WBUR, they raised an additional issue, and that is that it became clear, at least in that reporting, that the real estate industry is campaigning against the requests of Amherst and other communities for a real estate transfer fee for this purpose, and wanting to make sure, and are touting CPA as the answer. And it's not that we can do anything about it, but I thought it would be something that committee members at least would want to know about for future discussions. Anna?
Sure. So as one of the co-sponsors of our home rule, I feel like I have to say something here. I mean, I think it's really important to remember that this is a strong lobbying group in Massachusetts that's doing this work, right? And not forget the source of the information. CPA is an incredible funding source for so many different things, and CPA alone cannot cover the needs of housing in our communities. So to say that we should be draining our CPA funds entirely on housing pulls from a lot of really wonderful, worthwhile projects, and communities like Amherst are utilizing CPA the way it's intended, giving a lot to affordable housing, and still seeing that that is not enough, right? So for me, things like transfer fees are that support affordable housing, like ours, like Joe's bill, all of these are really important, because with all of the costs escalating and with the need level that we see, unless CPA was to become solely dedicated to housing, which I strongly believe that should not be the case, we need an additional fund. So I really, it's frustrating to me to see that the advocacy against these transfer fees is saying just use CPA, when we know that they could use all of the CPA funding and still need more. That's all.
Bernie?
Yeah, and another piece of this would be that there are a significant number of communities in the state that are setting aside their 10% for housing and CPA and not spending it. So I think it's appropriate if we went back to our friends in the legislature and say, tariff those communities, who aren't using their CPA money to create affordable housing. It just builds up and builds up and builds up. There should be some limit to it. The other elephant in the room here, which our friends, the realtors, won't probably want to talk about, is the zoning issues. I mean, I just read a report in Connecticut. It's something like 90% of the land in Connecticut is zoned for single family housing. I don't think Massachusetts is quite that bad, but I think as long as we continue to have large lot, single family housing zoning, we're going to have a tough time anywhere building more housing, affordable housing. When you have to pay $150,000 for a lot, you can't build an affordable house. Simple as all that. So I think thank Anna for her comments, and I do have some concerns about, and I worked in a couple of those communities where they've got lots of money set aside for affordable housing and not spending it. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for everyone for their comments. I just wanted to sort of just make everybody aware of the issue. I don't think that we're in a position to do more than we've already done, which was to recommend to the council that the council submit the bill, which it did in a timely fashion. And beyond that, it's now out of the committee's workload at the moment. I mean, it might come back when we get the next round of CPA requests, and we get back into an affordable housing discussion then. But at this point, we're just trying to keep ourselves well informed and go on. Bob.
I just wanted to note that I just saw that it's in Amherst Hills, which is a very, very high-end development, but a lot is now $300,000. So we're not going to get affordable housing on a $300,000 lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we are aware that a lot of times Community Preservation Act money has been used to acquire land because of this, and then a partner comes in to do the actual project, and they go to what was EOCD and other sources for additional funding. Since now, of course, community development and housing are separate departments with new administration. Kathy?
Yeah, I just, as long as we're having this general conversation, one of the issues when you talk about the piece of land is how much housing you put on that land. So one of the ways the affordable housing developers have done this is they bought a piece and they've got a waiver for density on it. And then they get a lot of state money to make it affordable. So this new one that's coming in Ball Lane, they were going to do some market rate. They're all duplexes. They were going to add some market rate duplexes. And when they priced out the cost of making the duplex, it was going to be too expensive. It was going to be too expensive for anyone to buy it. So they're only doing affordable units because the market rate would have been 350, 400,000. And those are what the duplexes are going up in Deerfield and Sunderland. And it's a combination of land price and construction. So it's as soon as someone's not with CPA money plus state money, it does something both to the price of the rent and the price of the property. That's beyond the reach of what people are thinking to get half a house. So it was pretty startling. We asked why you're not doing market rate, and they said because the market rate would have been too high for people to want to buy in, and we didn't want to have any empty units. They need them all to be occupied. So it was an interesting structure insight.
Well, yeah, no, thank you for reminding of this. And I know that because it's your district, you're paying close attention. Your district in your neighborhood, I think.
Yeah, it is both, but one of the things I thought was curious about the advocacy report around housing is they didn't advocate more state money going into CPA for affordable or more state money going into renovate existing units for solar and for heating efficiency. So if there were specific adds on to CPA that enabled people to do that with our existing units, the utility costs in those units would be lower. So I think there are some policies that the report just said, we need more housing, we need more money. So it would have been nice to also see where the money could come from to help municipal governments. And that part didn't seem to be there.
Yeah, I call on Anna, and then since it's 1:30, I think we should move on to councillor compensation so that we can get to our last agenda item. But Anna.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Andy. I think something that's also interesting is we look at the amount of funding and not at the amount of affordable housing created, right? So Pelham is lauded as doing the highest in the area for CPA, which is amazing. I am not out here to knock Pelham. Pelham's great. We love Pelham. But if you look at the number of units created versus the number of units created in other towns or in like Amherst, to Kathy's point, or no, sorry, I don't know whose point it was, sorry, but whoever was talking about getting a waiver, right, for density,
Yep.
I think it was Kathy, getting a waiver for density. Amherst has been putting up the sheer number of units Amherst has been putting up, I would argue, outpaces most of those other towns. And so it's interesting to consider the amount of funding, but also who's housing the most people, right, per capita and for the amount of land we have. I think that that's something that hasn't been looked into. We just look at the minimum of 10%, and Amherst doing a lot higher than that, which is great. But I think it's also important to consider the number of units that have been produced, which hasn't necessarily been examined.
Good point. Lynn?
Yeah, I just want to, again, recognize that Pelham has finally moved forward with some affordable housing. The reason their number is so high is that all of a sudden they just did it this year. And
Yep.
so, but the good news is they did it unlike several other communities near us.
So I don't know, we can go further into this, and it is past the time that
And there's Alicia.
yes, Alicia is here. Timing is perfect, Alicia. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
So I'll tell you exactly what happened. As you're aware, Michelle cannot join us today. And so we have essentially disposed of most other business except for 2 items, which we wanted to hold until 1:30 when you said you could be here. One is councillor compensation, and the other is scheduling of future meetings for the months ahead, because we understand your schedule is very complicated and wanted to hold that conversation until you're here. We did vote on the Community Preservation Act funds, the minutes. We've asked for public comments, so that we've taken care of other issues. And of course, the third quarter report is being postponed till the next meeting. I guess maybe I should offer you the opportunity as the one co-sponsor of the proposal to have the opportunity to speak first if you would like, though you don't need to. I just am offering it.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. I think I don't have too much to say, only because I think everything that I said during the first reading of this proposal still stands, and I would be happy, if anyone has any questions for me. But I did want to quickly reference the report that did come from the Northampton Working Group in terms of their counselor compensation, and to just emphasize that seems to be even more compelling to me of a reason for us to look at increasing our counselor stipends. Specifically, that what mine and Michelle's proposal was to bump us up to match what Northampton's current pay is, and they're looking at doubling what their current pay is. So I think this just gives us an even more compelling reason to look at bumping up to what Northampton is currently offering, even while they're looking at offering even more. And so again, I would just be happy to listen if anyone has any questions, and I'm really interested to hear what other counselors think about this.
Okay, I'm going to open it up for any comments from other members of the committee then. Bob.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed the meeting where this was first introduced. Alicia, I have a question. Would this increase in the stipends make a difference for people who now can't afford to serve on the town council? Or do we have to really go much higher in order to make that happen?
Thank you, Bob. That's a really good question. So in my opinion, I think we would have to go higher. But in speaking with and working with Michelle, this was our agreement in terms of trying to keep it conservative on our budget, because we are aware of our budget constraints, and we think that taking a huge jump at one time might not be the wisest decision. And that's why we also are recommending that there be a way for us to more regularly look at and evaluate what the compensation is. But we thought that at least an initial boost would definitely increase the, diversity, equity, and inclusion in terms of people who would be able to run for council, because it is very time consuming. And a lot of different kinds of people don't have the ability to volunteer.
Yeah, and I wanted to just kind of note, I believe in Northampton, they hadn't changed the compensation since 2014 or something like that. It's been a long time since they raised the stipends, or they proposed to raise them. So I think that's a good idea to look at this more frequently than every 9 or 10 years. So that's it.
Bernie?
Yeah, I back of the envelope calculation, I think the counselor stipend right now, and they're referred to as salaries, and they're not, because counselors really are employees, and you don't get paid by the hour. You get paid the stipend whether you show up or not, and whether you work really hard or you work not at all. But I think looking at the $5,000 figure, I mean, that really, adjusting for inflation, that's probably what I was making as a member of the Belchertown Board of Selectmen 30 years ago. So, yeah, I think an increase is in order, and I do think that a boost, maybe a boost even to the level that Northampton is suggesting is in order as well. I don't find any evidence that increasing compensation for increasing the stipends is going to have an impact on the diversity of the council. There's no that I could find. There's no research that's been done at a local level, and if you look at it at the state level, it doesn't work that way, because when you raise compensation, you broaden the pool overall of people who are willing to run for office. But that doesn't mean I'm opposed to these increases. Like I said, adjusted for inflation, you're getting what I got 30 years ago. I have a problem with health insurance for elected officials. I think the table that Sean gave us shows health insurance for the council, but we'd also have to, if I'm reading 32B correctly, we'd also have to provide that to school committee members or any elected official who gets a stipend. So that's a real wild card in terms of our costs, and being able to control it and predict it. Whereas a stipend for counselors is a predictable thing. We know year to year to year, we're going to have 13 counselors. We're going to have this amount of money. I'm also ambivalent about the family care piece of it. I think that the stipend should be sufficiently large that it covers a variety of expenses that someone who's holding an elected office might, on a local basis, might encounter. I know that Paul said that there'd be a trial program this year, this coming year. It's in the budget. But again, the information that John's provided us doesn't include the school committee or the Jones Library trustees, which Paul said would be included in that pilot. So these numbers are not accurate. Again, or need to be adjusted. So again, in terms of increasing the stipend, please, I'm all for that. But for the other two pieces, I would probably not support them at this time. And I know we gave assistance to town meeting members for family care, but town meeting members weren't compensated to begin with. So it's a little bit of a difference.
Linda, you've talked with Paul about what he's included in the budget and how he intends to proceed, I assume, or not?
Yeah. So let me just, all I want to talk about at this moment is the family care, or otherwise labeled childcare, but it should be labeled family care. And that is that has been put in the budget. That budget is the budget that it's been put into the FY24 budget. That is the budget that this committee has recommended to the town council. It was on the town council's agenda on Monday night. That particular issue was clarified that on Monday night, that money would be available as of July 1 for any counselor. And I didn't clarify whether it would be available for other elected officials. And it was put in, if you will, as kind of a pilot program, but it was based on, in fact, Bernie, going back to town meeting, where we already had that kind of fund for town meeting. So my understanding is that the town manager felt comfortable putting it in the FY24 budget. So that budget is coming up on Monday night for approval by the town council. And if it is approved with that in there, then that piece of this proposal, though not a robust amount, is in there as a way of at least starting to get some barometer on what the real need and would be for people. I also want to just go back and on that issue while I'm on it. And that is that I think we can look upon counselor salaries in any numbers of ways as to what we think they should pay for or not pay for, or what they compensate for or what they don't compensate for. But I actually believe that family and childcare is separate.
Bernie?
I supported the budget, so that the $5,000 is in there as a pilot. I mean, I supported it. I'm not convinced that it's a way to go. It'll be interesting to see what happens. And again, town meeting members, and I was one, weren't compensated at all. So I think there's a difference there. My thing is let's try to make the stipends at a fair and reasonable amount that's predictable year to year to year, so we can budget it. So it'll be interesting to see at the end of the year what happens with the family care. And I'm not, again, I've been there. You know, I was fortunate enough to have a situation where I received a lot of support. I also can tell you that as an elected official, I probably spent more money than I received from the town of Belchertown. I certainly spent more vacation time on the town than I did on myself. So I understand some of this push and pull, and my point is that there really needs to be an adequate stipend.
I don't know.
Andy, do you want to call on Alicia?
I did, I thought.
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear you. But yeah, I just wanted to respond to Bernie's comment because I really definitely hear where he's coming from. And so I wanted to share just that came up in the conversation that Michelle and I had when we were looking at this proposal, because my initial thought was to just give away higher stipend and a stipend that would be able to cover all things, but that made it a little bit more complicated because when we're talking about childcare, and stipends, we're then talking more about looking at hourly, like how many hours are counselors spending in meetings, and then how much hourly or will they be paying for childcare? And then we don't want them to be breaking even, and the stipend isn't entirely for childcare. So it became a little bit more complicated, which was the reason we decided to separate the two and to go for, in my opinion, the lower stipend amount.
Matt?
Hi, so yeah, I think it's, it needs to happen, right? I mean, I think that this compensation, the process of fixing compensation does need to happen. I noticed that I believe that the state representatives, there is a formula for an annual or biannual increase on their compensation. So I would propose that, this might be something that can be taken up as a bylaw, but I mean, the predictability function of it is the big issue, because otherwise it just sort of, we'll have endless debates about, the right timing and is the teacher contract ratified. I mean, I just think it needs to be fixed in a fair, equitable, and reasonable, predictable way, so that we can sort of make decisions about it. I'm disappointed that we got this sheet that doesn't include school committee or Jones. I think that's that really throws me off in terms of the conversation and having a number to talk about for this current year. Obviously I'm very interested in where things go with child and family care reimbursements and things like that. That being said, I lean towards, to me, that's an earmark. I don't support that. I think that should be a consideration lumped into the overall amount of the compensation, and not some kind of a pilot standalone program. So although I appreciate Sean and Paul putting that into the budget for this year, I don't think that's the way to go for compensation, and I hope that the council sort of goes just focuses on the stipend amount, and just recognize that every single person comes into a volunteer elected position with their own set of financial realities, and rather than trying to parse out which ones are more important than others, we just make the compensation the best fair compensation that we can, and then hope that gets the job done, and then some mechanism for annual or biannual increases as well, to keep up, not to keep up with inflation, but to reflect inflation. Thanks.
I think, Lynn, were you next?
Kathy's next.
You want to go to Kathy? Kathy, go ahead.
So if I focus just on compensation, I'm uncomfortable with doubling. I don't know what my lower number is. And I'm uncomfortable with paying anything more for someone who takes on the chair of a committee. So this had pieces. So I don't know whether we want to focus on amounts. I saw Michelle's memo to all of us, which she personally took insurance off the table, which I thought was a very wise decision. I think insurance gets us into a whole nother piece. So I also would like a process that said, we're looking to do a certain percent a year, and whether it's a year or every 2 years, something like that, with a review of that percentage as needed, so that we don't have to periodically face a big jump, but we talk about whether we want to do this. I think of these as volunteer jobs. If I look at the amount of hours that the planning committee spends, the planning board, not the planning staff, it's way up there, and especially way up there when the council gets active. It's lots of meetings and repeat meetings. So I think the town, and when I look at the charter documents, they're pretty interesting, because one of the concerns is this would get to be a really expensive form of government, especially since we are 13 counselors rather than 9 counselors as in Northampton. And the argument was, oh, no, don't worry. We're going to be saving a lot of staff time. The staff will spend far fewer hours. It literally, Lynn, in the prelude says the estimate is 600 fewer staff hours once we shift to the new form of government. So it will be just so much more efficient. And so we clearly, we have not achieved that level of efficiency in terms of draw on staff time. And I do think, in terms of the time commitment, when we talk about the money is part of it, but the time commitment is part of it too. If you were, I think you're remarkable, Alicia, because you've got children and a job, and you don't have a long-term partner. It's these kinds of high hour intensity volunteer work aren't well suited to full-time jobs, both parents working or single parents working with children, unless they have flexible hours. They're just tough. So I think what Lynn has started to do, which I really appreciate, is get the council meeting time under control. And a sample of 2 meetings does not say a trend is started. 3 meetings, a sample of 3 meetings, but the 2023 trend is in the right direction. Let's put it that way. And people, when we're still cheering when we get out, and 2 to 3 or 4 hours, you can see how long. So I do think we need to worry about the amount of time that committees spend, and some of the committees, they are generating the time. For the committee like the school building project, that's a project that generates the time, but sometimes the committees themselves are taking on a large amount of work. So I worry, I'll end my long thing with saying, I don't believe we should pay chairs of council committees more than the council. The counselor stipend is the counselor stipend. And we've got a precedent of paying the president more than the rest of the counselors, and I'm fine with that. I'm not sure I'm ready to go to doubling, and that's my piece. The family care, I think we should stay with the $5,000 pot and see how that works out, because I think it's really tricky for doing it. I like the idea of it, that if people really need help, but if we go up on the salary, on the stipend, we may not need to be thinking of enriching that pool in the future. I'm done.
Okay, thanks. Lynn, I put my hand up so I could get to be in order, but.
Yeah, so please go ahead. And
no, go ahead.
No, I've already spoken once. So why don't Andy, you and Anna both go ahead, and then I'll come back.
Well, Anna.
So I'm very in favor of the family care provision. I think that's really important. I supported that as part of this coming budget. And I think one of my questions, Kathy, you had mentioned setting a regular schedule for reviewing this. I just want to check, because the way that compensation increases happen is set by the charter. And so I'm looking at the provision now. It doesn't necessarily prohibit a regular reevaluation, but it would need to fit within the parameters established. And I'm not sure if that kind of thing would need to be part of a charter review, or if that can be something that we change, knowing that it's under the rules. Technically, it's not expressly prohibited by the charter. I'd be curious to explore that as something that I don't know that it needs to happen, every term. I think that would be too much, but I do think that having it be part of even part of a charter review, or part of it, every 5 years or every 10-year process would be important. So I support that. And just generally wanted to voice support for the family leave provision. And then the last thing was thinking through, in terms of amounts, I think it's important to also recognize that folks who have hourly jobs or even salaried jobs where they might request leaves, $10,000 is an amount that, you know, someone might be able to go to might be able to request a partial leave for, right? Whereas 5,000 is much more negligible, and it's harder to kind of justify that in terms of hours worked. So I think I agree with Alicia that in terms of actually making a dent on improvements to access, we will need to continue to reevaluate and look at what allows people to do this and work, but just maybe work less, right? To hold a 40-hour-a-week job plus counsel is really tough. And I know that I don't have nearly as many challenges as other folks do. So just naming that the higher we go, the more likely it is that someone could either work fewer hours if they're in an hourly role or request leaves, because it kind of covers that. So thanks.
So I've been thinking about this for a while, and I think about it in terms of financial. I think of it in terms of process, and I think of it in terms of the politics of doing this. And I think we kind of probably all at the end are going to have to think about all of these things. The process piece, I was very intrigued when I finally knew that there was a Northampton report and was able to read it. Of course, that's fairly recent because it's only been about a month or so that it's been provided by the committee to the council in Northampton. They have an ordinance which is in, I think, one of the appendices to the report itself. And the ordinance is equivalent to a bylaw here. And what they've obviously done is taken their charter and used the ordinance to flesh out a process that goes with it. And one of the things that I thought was very helpful in dealing with the politics side of it is that by having no elected officials on the body making the recommendation, that they've kind of helped move it a little bit away from the politics side of it, at least in the initial, though I imagine that when the council actually gets around to voting on it, it's going to be a political issue in and of itself. The council hasn't voted on it. This is a proposal that was made by the committee to the council there. But I am intrigued by it, and I wonder if we had thought about it and methodically, if we would have come up with a process that would have had some of the investigative steps that Northampton had taken. I think that we were just so overwhelmed by other things on our plate at the time that we just never really got around to having a thorough discussion about how to go about this discussion. And I'd rather to have Amherst do its own discussion and its own investigation. So that's sort of my comments about the process side. I do think that we could make a process recommendation as a part of our report. The financial, I think, is a troubling one, and because it is a fairly significant increase, and given the pressure on the budget, if we start down a path that is going to have the cumulative increase in all of the compensation for elected officials that are recognized in the charter, which is the council and school committee, we could very easily get to the point where what we're talking about is equivalent to one position in another department. And I think there's a financial question that we have to grapple with ourselves about. We heard a lot over the past month about the needs for staff positions in a variety of departments, and we also know that Amherst is in an unfortunate place as far as the amount of available funds for things that are beyond our control. And mostly it's lack of pilot for a large amount of land that is in the town limits that produces a lot of demands on municipal government. So I do think the financial is a part of our responsibility, of course, and I am troubled, therefore, by looking at the end of the amount that we're putting in and equating that to what else it might do within town government, and thinking about it at least through one round of discussion on the question of the financial consequence. The political piece, I think, is one that we're going to have to, for the most part, leave to the council. One thing that is helpful is that we know from the Springs Gazette that there's at least, if approved by the union membership, the APEA has reached a resolution to their but their negotiations over benefits and salaries. It was would have been very difficult on a political basis to consider having a vote in the council. I would have found as a councilor very difficult to have a vote if there had been that contract outstanding. We do know that there are other contracts for municipal units that are still outstanding, so it hasn't gone away entirely. It's just that was the one that had the most focus on it. So kind of those are what my thinking has been on it, has been kind of looking at and recognizing that there are these three elements to it, and we need to at least be aware of it as we try and push forward. So with that, Lynn, let me go back to you.
Yeah. So I want to build on a couple pieces. First of all, I've already been very clear where I stand on family support, and I do definitely believe in that. On the health insurance side, I think if the jobs were more like full-time jobs, like some city councilors are in much larger municipalities, then you can justify health care. But either most people who would be going for the council in Amherst probably have another job they're getting health care from, or they're part of a family unit that's bringing health care, or they in some way or another have gotten to the point they're supported by healthcare. So I'm not in favor of doing the healthcare. In all honesty, I was actually a member of the commission that looked at the statewide elected official salaries, and they did it for the very reason that people are talking about now. They did it so they could take it out of the political realm. And the recommendation, in fact, was formulaic and was also based on cost of living. So it was a very useful way to take it again out of the political realm. And at the same time, it didn't go into effect until the next term, as I recall. Hold on one second. I've been summoned by my family. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Okay, sorry. Second of all, I actually then decided, just for the sake of discussion, to play around with an Excel sheet. And I looked at, what would have happened if we had gotten a regular, say, 3%, which has been kind of where cost of living has been, between 2 and 3%. Starting with 2019, we were seated in 2018. And if anybody's interested, I'm willing to share my little Excel sheet with it. But I did the same thing that Alicia and Michelle have been recommending, and that is that all I did was take that number and then add 2,500 for person who's president. And it doesn't bring us that far along, but at least recognizes something that's much more in line with the kind of things we're negotiating in our existing contracts. I firmly believe that when the Charter Commission is seated for 2024, one of the things we should ask them to look at is the possibility of a change in the charter that addresses this issue.
Is there interest in seeing Lynn's spreadsheet? Well, hold it then, Bob.
Hold on, I can do it. Hold on.
I think that would be useful.
Let's. Okay. I think my calculations are correct. So we started at 5,000. We're still at 5,000. And this is my parameter, and this is just whatever is here. It's this number plus 2,500. It still doesn't seem like much. And I have to say, I was pretty amazed and really want to thank Michelle and Alicia for the comparison work they did do to particularly those groups around the western part of Massachusetts. I feel very uncomfortable making this kind of recommendation as a seated elected official. Questions or comments on this? I'm more than willing to take it down. And I can also add that it be added to, ask that it be added to the packet, since it was shown at a meeting and it technically has to be.
Okay, yep.
I get the same endpoint if anyone wants to know.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Bob?
Yeah, I wanted to echo a couple of points. One is that I do think that this issue should be revisited with the Charter Commission. I guess there's a review next year, is that right?
Yes.
So I think I agree. I think we should ask the Charter Commission to come up with a formula or recommend a formula. We could do that where we have some way that it's taken out of the political realm and made more of a kind of a general process or general way of increasing stipends to kind of account for cost of living and other issues. I do think, given that the town just voted for a pretty large tax increase, and we're getting higher water bills and sewer bills, I think I would recommend strongly that this council, or that we do not recommend that this council takes this up this year. I just don't think the timing is right. I don't disagree with the idea. I just think it needs a better process, and it needs to be somehow taken out of the political realm. I really believe that. It's when every time Congress votes to increase their salaries, there's a big uproar. Whether it's deserved or not, I do think that there's a danger of the perception that the council is increasing their salaries at a time when the towns, the rest of the town has to pony up more money for basic services. So it's a thought. I do think if it's taken out of the political realm and it's a regular kind of thing, it makes it much more palatable, and it's easier to kind of defend. Again, I support the idea in general. I just would recommend not doing it right now.
Okay, thank you. Kathy, I'm going to ask you to take over for chairing for about 1 or 2 minutes, because I'm going to have to step away for a second. But in any way, Matt is next.
Yep, thank you. Matt?
Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Kathy. Yeah, so as a resident member with no political stake, I would just say, from a finance committee perspective, I really think that this cost estimate needs to be redone by Sean, at least including school committee, if not Jones trustees. I think for us to really take a look at the numbers of this, we would, we just can't. We don't have a good picture of the financial outlay, and I haven't heard any explicit conversation about dropping one or the other. I can't imagine anybody in this room is suggesting that we would only make an increase to counselor salaries. So, I just think for the sake of practically looking at the finances of it, we as a finance committee need to see the full picture. And that doesn't necessarily mean one set, 5,000 versus 10,000 versus 3%. But I just think we need a projection that reflects the reality of what we're potentially trying to do. And that being said, I think that's enough. Thanks.
Okay, so now I'm in the awkward position of wanting to say something, but also chair. So I'm going to hold my comment and first call on Alicia and then Anna. And now Bernie's hand is up. I'll be the caboose.
I'm also happy to wait for others to speak.
Okay, Anna?
So I think I hear what folks are saying in terms of concern about doing this right now. And I think it's important to remember that the reason why we do it now is to serve the next coming council. And that this summer, when people are deciding whether or not to run for council, for some people, this is part of that decision. And I think that that's what we need to remember, is that for some people, the stipend is not part of their decision. And that's great. But for others who might not be able to do this, that increased stipend might make that difference. And so, Bernie, I hear you that there hasn't been scientific data on this, and maybe we can start studying it as we go, because I think that one of the reasons there hasn't necessarily been data is that people haven't been doing this in the intentional way to have the intended result that we are having, right? And there is some research out there on impact on boards and committees and things like that, but I do think that it's important to do this now, because if we don't do it, we miss another term. And then we're going to be at the same decision point again in 2 years, right? Looking forward to the next council. So I think it's important to remember, we're not voting to raise our salaries. Those of us who are elected as town councilors, we could lose our election, right? Like, there is not a guarantee that we would benefit from this if we are all running again. That's the other if. So I guess I want to take us out of it, because we don't, and non-voting members aside, we don't know that we would be the beneficiaries. And that's why this process is designed the way it is so that we can look forward and say, this is what we're setting up for the next council. That's all.
So Alicia, would you like to speak now, or should I call on Bernie first?
Bernie can go. Thank you.
Bernie. You muted yourself.
I have two screens here, my laptop and my big screen that has all the documents on it, and there's two mice, and I occasionally grab the wrong one. I got to remember the blue one is what works this. Anyway, I'm not opposed to, first off, it's very difficult always for an elected official, and again, having been there, to advocate raising their compensation. I appreciate that. It's hard. And I understand full well that this wouldn't take place now. It would be in the future after the elections. I don't have a problem with increasing the stipends. And again, I think it's a mistake to refer to them as salaries. Increasing the stipends for counselors to a reasonable sum of money, because you do incur, even though you're really not working on an hourly basis, because you'd be worth far and away more than that. You do incur a lot of incidental costs, in holding the office. And this is some way to offset those incidental costs. So I'm not disagreeing with an increase for the counselor. How much? You have what Northampton's suggesting. You have what's here on the page. I think probably the number is somewhere in between as a way to start. I think we need a process to do this in the future so that counselors are put in the awkward situation of debating their salaries until somebody, a neutral third party, comes up and says you should be paid this. So there's that. I think as we go forward with these discussions, we can eliminate the prospect of health insurance because no one seems to be supporting it here. And in fact, probably 3/4 of the cities and towns of Massachusetts don't pay health insurance for elected officials. Of the towns they've been affiliated with one way or another, 50% of them didn't have insurance for elected officials, and the other 50% I worked to get rid of it. So I have a bias in that regard. So that's where we're at, and nobody I've known is going to run for public office and all the stuff that goes on with it because they can give up on a job unless it's a full-time position, like say a city councilor in Springfield or Boston. Most of the time, it's people are going to calculate what those incidental costs are and whether or not the compensation, the stipend, will help offset those incidental costs. So you do broaden the pool, but the pool doesn't necessarily look any different than the pool we have now. So that's where I'm at in that regard. So let's hopefully move forward. If we need to, if the council needs to appoint a committee made up of non-elected types to take this matter up, that might be a way for the council to go. But again, I think that the stipends need to be raised, and I think they need to be raised to significantly. So thanks.
Andy, are you back to chairing?
Yeah, I'm back to chairing, but why don't you go ahead? Yeah,
then call on me. Okay, so I have a timing question on this because I very much like what the process that Northampton had working for it, which was a pre-existing ordinance that has 7 members who could not be elected now and couldn't be formally elected. So they tried to get, and they were only 2-year appointments. So and I am totally uncomfortable on, I said it at the beginning, but I think doubling our stipend, given the stress the town is under, and given the large increase we just did with a voluntary increase in to pay for the school of our property taxes, which was very generous of the citizens. And I must say that I have had several people tell me, and this, you wouldn't be surprised, they're from the finance department at the School of Management, feeling that the council isn't financially accountable in the way we should be, really being tough on overall expenditures as they look at, as decisions made and accumulate. So I am uncomfortable about us voting a doubling of our own stipend, even though we might not be the recipients of it. Timing wise, if we said out of this committee, we want to immediately do an ordinance, if we have to do an ordinance, we seem to be able to set up advisory boards, all sorts of ad hoc committees, just with the stroke of a pen. And what Northampton has done is it made the mayor or someone else appoint these, so it wasn't that the council was appointing who would be on the advisory. Do we have time to set up a committee like this? Otherwise, what I could support is something less than the increase that's been proposed. I mean, Lynn came up with, if it had gone up 3% a year, we would be at something less than $1,000 increase. clearly you would want to round it up. You know, are we at 6, 7, or 8? And Andy's point about the total, because there are 13 of us, and then Matt and others have pointed out, and we haven't even talked about the school committee, we're talking about a teacher. We're talking about a firefighter. We've been sitting here squeezing the operating budgets left and right as people are making extremely difficult decisions. So I think for the council at this time to talk about doubling our stipend is, I don't feel financially accountable. I won't support that, is I guess the way I will say it more firmly. I don't want to waffle on it. I'm totally in support of the family pool and wanting to see how it works, because I could see it would get it into a lot of complications. But right now it's been set up, and I would like to see how the town manages that. And I think that going forward, we might not need it if we eventually increase the stipends. But I don't see me as a sitting councillor voting this type of increase. I think it needs to be taken out of our hands. And I'll stop.
Alicia?
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, so I had a couple of comments, one of them Anna already made, and so I'll just re-emphasize that even if we were to make this decision right now, it doesn't necessarily affect any current counselors. And so it would be for the next council. And that was my intention, and I believe Michelle's intention when we were writing this, is that we want to expand who can and will run for council. Like, that is the whole entire point. And so I think that there really is no better time than right before an election, because people who are prospectively thinking about running, this may influence their decision, which is much of what Anna said, but that was what I was also going to say. And also that when I talk about diversity on the council and diversity and inclusion in like all town committees, I don't just mean racial diversity. I also mean like financial diversity, like people who are low income. And so again, like, these conversations sometimes are very difficult for me to have as one of the only low income peoples. But I'm telling you because I have experience. So we may not have the data because there may not have been research done, but I have experienced this and I am living data that this would help people, specifically in my position as a single parent with 3 children that I'm taking care of on my own. Raising the stipend. There may not be specific data pointed to council participation, but there is data in terms of stipends with public participation. When I worked with a company doing an equity audit, they had taught us that if we want caregivers and families and peoples to participate in our audit and our surveys, we offer them stipends. That is how you build participation. So that there is data on that, actually, that looking at stipends and fair stipends does increase participation. And so I think like this is really not as abstract as we're trying to make it seem. I think it's very simple. Like, we need to offer a more fair compensation for this job in order to allow more people to run and to be successful counselors. And so when we're also talking about the idea of paying chairs more, which I'm honestly not married to, just as a thought, I think increasing the stipend overall would be an accomplishment in itself. But just to explain where that idea came from, it's the amount of work that goes into that position. And making sure that counselors can do their job effectively. And so again, just bringing my personal experience into this, since we don't have real live data, is that when the council first started, I was able to take all my council meetings with my camera on. This is something that a lot of people say to me, like, why do you not have your camera on? Well, this is because I do not have childcare, because I very quickly found out that I will use my entire stipend to pay for somebody to watch my kids during a meeting. And I could much more benefit from that stipend to put food in my house than to pay for people to watch my kids to be on a meeting. And so my kids are with me when I am on my meetings, jumping all over me, running around the house. I am putting them to bed while we are on council meetings. This is why my camera is off. If I could compensate somebody to be in my home and to help me with these things, I could, one, not only be in the town room with my colleagues, which is what I actually would love to do, but I could, two, more fully participate and be present in my meetings, which I think I deserve to do as a counselor, but cannot do because it is not fair compensation. And so there are a lot of other things. And that's why we said family care, because other people don't have children, but they may have an elderly parent or another person in their home who they need to take care of, who would need to be taken care of in order for them to effectively participate on the council. And it's about being effective, and it's about being a good counselor, and it's about being able to get your work done, being able to be present. Because the other thing is, like, I know it is optional to be on other committees as a counselor, but I have found that the less I participate in other committees, the more confused I am at the council level. So, like, the more available I am to go to finance committee meetings, the more available I am to check in on TSO meetings or CRC meetings, the more informed I am, the better job I can do, the more knowledgeable I am about the decisions I'm making at the council level. And so, honestly, it benefits the town overall, I think. So I just wanted to offer those things.
Thank you. Something I'm frustrated by in this conversation is that, when Alicia and Michelle brought this proposal forward, they followed the process as it was designed. And we are finding flaws in our process and faults in our process, but we cannot fault the sponsors of this for following the process as it was written. And so my concern with voting this down in order to create a study is, one, gosh, we do that a lot. And it really feels to me like we're shirking our responsibility. That is not to say I don't think that a study would be important, or that having a commission made of non-council folks would be the best approach to actually fixing our process. I think that that's true. But I think to ignore, just to say, well, we don't like the process the way it was written, so we're going to create a commission to do this better, negates the fact that it's still our process, and the sponsors followed our process as written, and we cannot fault them for doing that. And I think that it does them a disservice by ignoring this, because we just don't like the way that the rules are, right? We can change the rules, and I think that we should support this measure. I think both are true. I also want to just note a couple things. Bernie, I disagree. I think that there are folks, and something I'm challenged by often is that there have been a lot of times on council where I've had to use myself as a personal example, and otherwise people don't believe me when I say things are the case. And I recognize that I am not always the true story for everyone, right? But there is also truth in my story and truth in my experience, and I want to make sure that that is heard. And so I hope that folks do believe that when people say, I would be able to take time off of work to commit to council if I made $10,000 a year, that is true. That is something that I would be able to go to. I don't know that my boss would agree to it. It makes me very uncomfortable to say it in a public meeting, because now they might know that I'm going to do that if this gets upped and I get reelected. But all of that said, that is a reality for people who might have that flexibility. And it makes a difference, right? I am able to do a compressed work week during the summer. So I work my entire 40 hours, Monday through Thursday. It's a little brutal, but then Fridays, I hypothetically have off, which means Fridays I spend the full work day doing counsel. And I'm a much better counselor in the summer because I've had that dedicated time versus sporadically throughout random breaks in my day and after work. So I do think that there's, and Bernie, I'm not faulting you. I'm not I didn't take it personally at all. I just want to make sure people know that there are different subsets of people where this impacts deeply. And the more that it increases, the broader that subset of people. And then the last point that I think is really important to make is we've been talking a lot about family care and childcare, and there's always going to be a second prong to that approach, which is that we need to also be advocating on a state level for more funding for this, right? If we're finding that we need to subsidize or support family care for our elected officials, one, what a privilege that we're able to do that. It's an incredibly important thing. And two, it shouldn't be a privilege, it should be a right. And we need to make sure that we are also advocating on a state level for universal pre-K, for increased funding for things like that, so that we aren't faced with this problem at a local level. Because impacting how many ever folks would benefit on the council. And there's plenty of other people in our town that would really need that support as well. So those are my main 3 points. Thanks.
Bernie?
Yeah, I understand it. I mean, like I said, I was fortunate enough to have a considerable amount of vacation time. So I took a lot of vacation time, and I was fortunate enough to have a boss. And when I would go to her and say, gee, I really need to, and she would go, okay, fine. And she'd sign the sheet and I'd take time off. So I understand that. I mean, this gray hair got here by something more than just simply aging. Raised a family, been involved for more time than I care to count with municipal governments and local governments. So, that's why I said I'm very supportive of paying people giving people a reasonable stipend to help compensate for the hassle factor involved. I've known people who who are self-employed, who get elected to boards and committees, and I always warn them, especially if you're self-employed, people think you have all the time in the world because you work for yourself. Now, you can't do that, and you can't continue. You can't exploit people, and you can't expect people to volunteer when you make things very difficult. And so, along with better stipends, we have to have serious discussions about civility. We have to have serious discussions about time commitments overall. We have to look hard at how much support is given to the council and how we staff our town. So there's a bunch of other things that go into this. And again, I can use myself as an example, but and as I said, when you increase the stipend, you broaden the pool, but the pool doesn't look any different from what it does now. So, you in terms of in terms of who chooses to run. So we have to work on not only finances, we've got to work on some other factors as well. And I think civility is one of them, and the kind of exposure that you put yourself up to when you're elected to a public office. So all of a sudden, you find that people are writing nasty letters to the editor about you, or leaving. I ended up installing a second phone line and with just my name on it to handle all the crank calls I got. So there's a lot of other expenses involved in running for public office, and I think people need to be aware of that, and as well. So thanks.
So where I think that we were at in this discussion is that we actually seem to have a consensus on some things, but we have one big one where we don't have consensus. But I think that where we seem to possibly have consensus is that there's not an interest right now in pursuing the health insurance coverage, and that I think that we're not in a place where we want to make that recommendation for this round of the discussion, and would best leave that for a future process. So we've talked about in the future that we would like to see some kind of improvement on the current process that would involve something like Northampton has, with a committee composed of people who are not elected officials, who are appointed to actually give the kind of consideration that they gave to this and make some specific recommendations but that's something that needs to be left aside, other than the observation that we can report that we think that it ought to be explored for the future, and that we would look to the possible charter review committee as the appropriate place to do that, or another mechanism if that becomes more preferable. I think that there seems to at least generally be a consensus right now of continuing to treat the family care as a separate item and to take advantage of the money that's been set aside in the budget that begins July 1st and see how quickly it goes and see what difference it makes and come back to that issue after there's some experience that we've had with it, which then gets to the last point is that I think that the general consensus seems to be that we do think that there's some adjustment that needs to be made in the compensation, but that's where we're probably least coming together on a specific recommendation. I think that there's a feeling that something needs to be done now, and there would be benefit to making this happen on a more regular basis as opposed to happening so that you have to deal with it as a large single jump at one time. But I don't see that we've come together to at this point yet to make a recommendation. So I was, and I guess the last thing that I wanted to say is in my review of this whole thing is that there's discussion that's been made about other elected officials. And of course, the charter includes the school committee, does not include the library trustees. The school committee is in a very strange place on this issue, at least the current school committee. And that is that if you look at our budget, the school committee stipends are actually in the town manager's budget, I believe, and not in the not in the school budget, because the school committee of itself feels that they would not have made that the priority choice for allocation of school budget funds. And that for that reason, from the time we started this charter implementation 5 years ago until now, that's kind of been that it's been recognized as a part of the town budget, not the school budget, because that's what for the reasons that I just stated. So that's not part of the summary, but I think that I wanted to point that out too. Is there a general feeling that the other points that I've raised, there seems that there's agreement, that there's consensus around those points, recognizing the big one that needs to be decided yet? Kathy?
Yeah, Andy, I think you did a good summary. I had a question. I've said I wouldn't not be in favor of doubling. I am in favor of something between 5 and 10. So my question is, do we want to, and I am looking at the total impact of what that is, and also that since this would be the next council, it would be a half a year because it would start in January of next year. And so I need to know whether we have room in the budget for that and what the impact is. So, we've got a proposal to go from 5 to 10 and the related increase. And as I said, I am not in favor of paying chairs an additional amount. I would just do stipend and just want to focus it. So I raised that, Andy, when you took a brief piece in the original proposal, it was both a doubling and an extra payment if you're a chair of a committee. And I am not in favor of that. For starters, I don't want people to hold on to chairness for money. I would like to see chairs rotating or people be able to come on and off of it. But in any case, I don't know whether we need to come up with a up or down on 5 versus 10. Bernie seems to be in favor of the 10. I don't know how others feel. Would we want to talk about something less than 10? And how much time do we have? I just don't know. The council's looking for something for us, and we could punt on the stipend and say we had a long discussion about it, but do we want to say something more? And that's so. For example, 8 going to 8 would be a more than a 50% increase. It would be about a 60% increase, which is a substantial increase. And then recommending that we try to set up a process that would address this 2 years from now or something, but not, we wouldn't have to put the detail of it. So that's my question of how much more do we need to do at the finance committee level? It's pretty easy to do the math on 5 times 13 people, 5,000 more each, 3,000 more each. It's pretty easy math. That was my both question and comment.
Okay, I'm gonna call Matt in a second, but I just wanted to make the observation that if we don't come up with an amount and we're essentially punting it back to the council, and the council is going to have the same difficult discussion that we had, and I'm not sure that they would get there any faster. I think that they may actually appreciate a recommendation.
That's where I was going, Andy. It would just, to say we had difficulty when it came to the number doesn't seem like we're providing much help.
No, I realize that, but it was kind of where we were at. I think that in the few minutes we're going to have to make a decision. I know that Matt has a time limit, and I don't know how much he has left. But we could, if we did it fairly quickly, have one more meeting to talk about that issue and the third quarter report, and just leave it to those two issues and try and do one additional meeting after we've had some time to think about it. But we'd have to do it fairly quickly because the council does need to act. I believe July 2nd is the date where we hit upon the first 18 months of the current council, which is what the charter sets as a limit. Matt?
Yeah, I just I want to say I agree with Kathy that really, within, if finance can make an actual dollar recommendation, I think we'll be doing, justice to the town. Like, I think that'd be appreciated and is sort of our job on some level. That being said, I don't think we could do it today. I do think we need another meeting. I would have a really hard time supporting anything that didn't include other bodies. I think I or at least a lengthy, more of a discussion about the explicit reason why we would increase town council's stipends and not others. I think that would be a sticking point for me, although, there may be a rationale behind it. I'm just not fully understand. I heard what you said. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that articulation means to me that we wouldn't recommend an increase across the board. And I also don't, somebody said we had consensus about the child care as a second, or child/family care as a second item. And I know and I heard at least one other person say that, we'd rather see the overall stipend be reflective of the cost of this volunteer commitment, which I think is a very a very good way of putting it. And I would continue to stick with that, to Alicia's point, that we're looking for a genuinely diverse, council or body, which means, people in poverty, for whether or not they or everybody has their own economic circumstance. And, I think as much as I want to, support families and people supporting themselves, their loved ones, I do think that personally, I think one stipend that sort of rules them all is the appropriate way to go on that. And I'm happy to discuss. My mind could be changed, but that's based on where this conversation has gone so far. Thank you.
Alicia?
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, so I just wanted to say that I am okay with letting go of the insurance piece. That's fine with me. I'm in agreement with that. And then for the stipend piece, again, it's a little bit complicated because I would like to recommend a specific number to the council. When I had these conversations with Michelle, I thought 10 was too low. And I still think 10 is too low. I think it's a start. So that is why, again, we added the family care piece. That was a result of me thinking that 10 was too low. So I also hear where Matt is coming from in terms of just offering a higher stipend. That was my initial thought in approach. But also then it becomes more complicated in terms of our town's budget overall. And maybe not everyone needs the compensation for childcare. So it sort of lessens the burden on the town's piece, which was our figuring in this. But I would also support a way higher increase because that is what I think. I think we're in line for an increase that is similar to what was recommended by the Northampton board. I don't know. I don't actually think our budget could sustain that, which is why this is what I thought was the alternative. And I know we don't have specific numbers, and I thought, so I'm not sure if I'm wrong, but that the recommendation was to increase the stipend for also the school committee. I think that was included in the recommendation. And so because we're looking at going from 5,000 to 10,000, that's pretty much a double. If we needed a quick estimate, a quick, more realistic estimate, all we would need to do is ask how much do we currently have set aside for stipends for council and school committee and times 2. That's a very simple way to get a more reasonable estimate. So I don't know if we have those numbers readily available. And I would also be happy to have more of a conversation about this because, again, I would support a higher stipend, but I didn't think that everyone would, which is why, again, I think that 10 is a safer bet and is still a substantial enough increase that it would make a difference, where as opposed to 8, I don't think makes much of an impact.
Bernie?
I think what we're going to end up doing is having to come up with some kind of political compromise here. That so certainly another meeting is in order. We're looking at this happening January 1, 2024. So it is a half a year. Money is tight all over. We said to the school committee, we're not going to give you $84,000, but to turn around and say, well, we'll give you $50,000 more for stipend increases, I think not go over well. I sort of like what Lynn did with her table. The magic 3% cost of living adjustment, which seems to be written in stone somewhere in Massachusetts, because that's what we see time and time and time again. Using a peg like that, this is what this is what's been done for employees. To do something that is an interim step, because we all seem to agree that we need a better process to address this. If we can come up with a better process that will work by then in short order, then that's one thing. The other thing would be to come up with an interim number and say, this is a peg. This is what we're starting with, just because we don't have a good process, and just because it is in some ways unfair to have elected officials debating their compensation. So that would be my thought for the next meeting that we have, is we come up with something that has a basis for that we can point to that seems to be fair, and start there. Not that that's going to get us far in terms of what I believe is a real compensation, but it's a way to start. Thanks.
So we need to turn to that last subject on the agenda for a moment and find out when we're available for the next period of time. I'm assuming, as I said previously, that we're going to be meeting once or twice a month between now and when the budget guidelines are on us again in November. And then those last couple of months of the current council, we're in that scramble to finish out our terms and to budget guidelines because they can't wait till the new council and meet with the budget process, and that's the way it is. So knowing that we're talking about 1 or 2 meetings a month, can we agree now, or do we need to would it be easier to get, ask Athena to do some kind of poll on Monday?
Andy, this committee has to meet at least once prior to the 26th of June in order to bring any proposal in counselor compensation forward. So
I think
as
that's
much
right.
as I'm very much interested in us coming up with a meeting, I think what I'm also hearing from people is we need to do this particular item as, and our last meeting prior to July 2nd is presently scheduled for June 26th.
Not going to be really too late to, is what council meeting comes after the 26th?
Not until the July 17th.
So we need to be decided, we need to get something to the council prior to June 26th.
Yes, yes. Absolutely. And I also want to point out that we had already polled for the 16th in the afternoon, and we had did not have consensus on that time.
I know. Alicia, you've been the one who's had the tightest scheduling challenges. Are you able to share with us where you are for the next period of time so that we know what works for you?
Yeah, I could do, so our current schedule still works for me. I could essentially do any day of the week that we don't have a council meeting after 5. But Fridays, I also don't work. So while I also jam pack them with appointments, it's free. So like I can schedule around any time on a Friday. That also doesn't conflict with elementary school building committee. But yeah, so like Fridays at 1 are usually good for me. I could do another time on Friday. I could still do a 5:30 on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, Thursday. So hopefully that's helpful.
So if we're going to be doing that, and it was going to be a Friday, it's either the 16th or the 23rd with a very quick turnaround. And doing a report that is going to be as ready as we can do it and fill it in and get it to the council for the 26th. But there wouldn't be a time to have a collaborative process on the development of the report. One of us would really need to do it. Right.
If you need a quick reaction, I cannot do the 23rd. I could do the 16th. And I have no idea about the end of the day. I'm going to be on another continent. So as we get to the late afternoon hours, that may be an advantage to everyone. I will be groggy because it'll be late at night.
I'll be on this continent, but I'm in the same boat as Kathy. I cannot do the 23rd, but I could do the 16th.
Is there anyone who can't do the 16th?
I can't, but that's okay. I'm not a voting member. I can offer my comments in writing to the group before you meet. It'd probably be a badly worded rehash of what I sort of mumbled through earlier.
Okay.
Alicia has her hand up.
I know that Alicia does. Sorry that I'm beginning to lose my voice a little bit. We know from what Athena told Michelle this morning that if any of us wants to share thoughts with the committee in advance of a meeting, it has to be by a memorandum that is going into the packet because it becomes, it needs to be a public document. And even with that, I would want to make sure that Athena is comfortable with that, since she's the one who's our guru on the topic of making sure we're in compliance with all rules. So I'm not against memos as long as Athena is comfortable with the process. Alicia.
I am available on the 16th, but it's also my child's graduation, so I might be slightly like I might join at 1:30 again. I have 2 kiddos graduating that week.
Oh, congratulations.
It would be good to it would be good to set a time that Alicia can make it to start. So I wasn't wedded to 1:30 is okay, or 2. Yeah, I don't want to convene and then wait. So it'd be better to pick a time when you can actually be with us at the beginning, Alicia. So
can we agree on 1:30? And what we'll do is take up the third quarter report if there are any final questions about it. At that as first item, and it's only 2-item meeting. That's what the agreement is.
And Andy, what might help in terms of efficiency, and I have no idea, but if you encapsulize that we've got 3 or 4 separate issues that we need to make a decision on, and you did that in writing back to us. So what we've talked about is, are we increasing the stipend? If so, to how much? Yes or no on the family pool. We made a decision on health insurance, I think, so we can take that off the table. And then my third would be, do we need to consider school committee at all? And my fourth is, are we going to want to propose a process? So do something, and propose a process, which is what Bernie said, is, like do the interim. So if you could just get us that list back in some way that makes sense to you with words, then we could start out with a structured conversation about it. That would be helpful to me.
Andy, let me just add, we can make those into motions and have a motion sheet.
Yeah, Lynn, so that's what I was looking at, just separate them out, and then we could do them one at a time. We could do, if there's something we all agree on, we could do it first. So, yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Do the best I can, and I will consult with Athena about making sure that I'm doing it in an appropriate fashion.
She can help develop the motions too.
And it's basically a shorthand set of bullets from what we've been discussing already. So it's not, I'm not asking you to render opinion as much as to just say we've separated it out to these elements, and that's what we're going to be discussing next time.
I think that in the end, the big discussion, I think we know, is going to be the amount of increase that we would recommend, if we recommend an increase at all. And
correct.
That's really where the focus of the discussion needs to be. So that said, I don't think there's Lynn, your hand is up.
Yes, let me just mention, this is a posted item on the agenda for Monday's council meeting. I will be removing that so that the council will not be engaging in that discussion on Monday without the recommendation of the finance committee. And then I also wanted to mention that a person has been in the audience with their hand raised. I don't know if they realized we'd already had public comment.
Actually, I'm going to go back and get ask that person if they would, but if they could just offer their comment in a couple of minutes, it would be helpful. It might be helpful to know we are needing to adjourn. So, but I want to value our commitment to public comment. So why don't you bring that individual into the room? And let's do it real quickly. And I think that we have a date for the next meeting and a time, which is 1:30 on the 16th.
I have promoted them to panelists 3 times. And it doesn't seem to be working. Let me
Okay.
try allow to talk. There we go. Okay.
Okay, would you like to identify yourself and where you live, and then if you can say who offer your comment in a couple of minutes, we would really appreciate it, since we're
And they have to unmute, Andy.
yep, but you do have to unmute.
I've asked them to unmute, but then they have to unmute. I've sent an ask to unmute to the person, or at least my computer is saying it. I've done that. Can you unmute?
Because if not, then I think we need to go on and adjourn. So, because
If they send you a comment by email, Andy, you can share it with the committee. That's, we've been getting comments for the school building committee that way, and just a request to share with the whole committee.
I'm sorry that I don't seem to be able. I'm trying to. I am sending a message that said ask to unmute, but maybe it's not going through for some reason.
Possible they stepped away from their computer too and didn't,
Yeah.
like you said, their
It's
hand.
possible.
okay, so I think we're gonna just have to close it out. That if anybody, as you said, wants to offer comment to the committee, they're always welcome to do that in writing. Though you should just be aware that when you offer comments to any body, any committee, or the council as a whole, that it is a public document, and it will go into the packet. But what you were going to say at the meeting would have been public too. So with that said, I don't think we have anything else today. I know that Matt had to leave, and we have our plan for a very limited next meeting. And so with that, I think we'll treat it as adjourned. And thank you. This has been a very healthy and helpful discussion. So thank you.